Alleluia, Christ is risen.
The Lord is risen indeed. Alleluia.
Please be seated. Every year on this second Sunday of Easter, we read this account from John's Gospel. The disciples have chosen not to believe Mary and the other women when they tell the disciples what had happened early that morning at the tomb. And instead of rejoicing, proclaiming their own alleluias, the disciples have holed up, double bolting the doors, fearing for their lives. And then somehow Jesus appears. While he has been resurrected in bodily form, clearly he has been changed as well. John writes, he came and stood among them in spite of the locks. And Jesus says to them, peace be with you, showing them his hands and his side. And it's when they see that, at that point, after seeing those scars, they know that it's really him and they rejoice. And then he grants them peace again. And then sends them out just as God had sent him out into the world, breathing on them so that they could receive God's Spirit. But Thomas, John writes, Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not there when Jesus came. The others tried to tell him later that they saw Jesus, but he responds in the same way that they did in their response to the women. No, I'm not going to believe it. Not unless I can see with my own eyes. He asks, of course, for the very thing that the other disciples needed to believe themselves. You did catch that, right? It was only when they saw Jesus' hand and his side that they believed, and now Thomas wants what they had. And I have to tell you, every year it's the same for me. I feel a bit sorry for Thomas. He was clearly in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe they had sent him out to go get takeout or something. Who knows? But because of this, he's been shackled with that moniker, Doubting Thomas, ever since. Peter and James and Philip and Thaddeus and all of the rest, well, they doubted too. They refused to believe Mary's story. But Thomas is the only one that we know as the doubter, the skeptic, the one who has to see and touch the scars of Jesus before he can truly believe. Not one to leave the story unfinished, John the evangelist sets the scene once more, right, the next week with the disciples behind those locked, closed doors the following Sunday. Thomas is with them, so maybe they had called out for delivery. Although the doors are shut, Jesus once again appears before them and says, peace be with you. And then looking directly at Thomas, Jesus says, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand. Put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe. And Thomas, upon seeing all of this, exclaims emphatically, my Lord and my God. As theologian Martin Copenhaver noted, this is one of the strongest declarations of faith recorded in the entirety of the New Testament. Have you believed because you've seen me? Jesus asks. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet come to believe. And then we read, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you might come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and then that through believing you may have life in his name. John knows that we, the people in his audience, won't ever see Jesus face to face. We won't have that same option as the disciples to see Jesus' hands or side. We're not going to have the physical proof, but only second and third and fourth hand accounts. And yet when we believe, that means that we are blessed. Canadian sculptor Timothy Schmaltz has a work that he has replicated more than 50 times over the past decade or so. It's of a park bench with the figure of a man under a thin blanket lying on it who has fallen asleep. One of those sculptures resides outside of St. Albans Episcopal Church in Davidson, North Carolina. It's an affluent community 20 miles north of Charlotte. The church accepted the piece in 2014, a gift from a parishioner in honor of a loved one, because the homeless man depicted is Jesus, identifiable only by the nail-marked scars on his feet, which are slid out a little bit from the blankets. According to one news report at the time, quote, Schmaltz said he was inspired to craft the statue after seeing a homeless man on the ground before Christmas in 2011. He said, my instinctive thought was, this is Jesus Christ. I saw Jesus. As you might imagine, when people encounter the sculpture, and there is one in Seattle just outside of a Roman Catholic housing program, responses are mixed. There was one person, upon first viewing the installation at St. Albans, who called the police to report that there was a vagrant person outside of the church. Others didn't like the sculpture because it depicted Jesus as being so needy. Because, of course, we all know that Jesus was so powerful. For me, though, I can't get Schmaltz's own words out of my head when he saw that unhoused person. I saw Jesus. Depictions of Jesus abound with a leaning toward that light-skinned and sometimes blue-eyed European hippie look that we've grown accustomed to. In his book, The Faces of Jesus, minister and author Frederick Buechner poses the question of what Jesus might have looked like. He writes, to say that Jesus had a face is to say that, like the rest of us, he had many faces, as the writers of the Old Testament knew, who used the Hebrew word almost exclusively in its plural form. To their way of thinking, the face of a man is not a front for him to live his life behind, but rather a frontier, the outermost ever-changing edge of his life itself in all of its richness and multiplicity. And so those writers spoke not of the face of the man or of God, but of God's many faces. The faces of Jesus, then, he writes, all the ways that he had of being and of being seen. The writers of the New Testament give no description of any of those faces, because it was his life alive inside them that was the news they hawked, rather than the color of Jesus' eyes. Nobody tells us what he looked like, and yet, of course, the New Testament itself is what he looked like. And we read Jesus' face there in the faces of all of the ones he touched or failed to touch. Our baptismal covenant, which we will reaffirm in a few minutes, asks us if we will respect the dignity of every human being and love our neighbors as ourselves. Putting it another way, it asks, will we see the face of Jesus in others? Will we see Jesus in those needing our care, perhaps even those on a park bench, catching a few moments of peace? And will we see Jesus' face in those extending care to us? Can we see Jesus? On some days, I'm just like the disciples, needing that physical, tangible proof right there in front of me that Jesus has been raised, seeing or experiencing something that raises my doubt in him. But then on other days, I realize I have proof enough in front of me already. I see the people around me. And as those of the resurrection, as Easter people, we show the very face of Jesus ourselves because Jesus lives in us. Jesus' face is our face. And his is the face of our neighbor and our spouse and our children and coworker. His signs of new life continue on in us and in others. Those works that John says that he didn't have time to write down, well, friends, they continue on till this day. These signs of Jesus continue as you become Jesus yourselves. You glimpse the mark of his face in the faces of everyone who ever looked toward him or away from him. Which means, finally, of course, that you glimpse the mark of him in your own face, as Frederick Buechner puts it. So while Jesus says that we are blessed if we don't see and yet still believe, I think we are also blessed if we see and believe. Because the presence of Jesus is here all around us. We'll see him in the faces of those being confirmed and received and reaffirming their faith this morning. And we can see him those who are sitting there right beside us. We can see him perhaps as the server at the local coffee shop or in the children's librarian when we're there. We can see him in the homeless woman that we will pass tomorrow on our way to work. We can see him in the friend that we will grab a bite to eat with. And he is here, all around us, if we can just open our eyes enough and see, really and truly see. There are signs of his work still happening to this day. And they are so numerous that no amount of books could hold all of them. We just have to see and believe in the risen Christ because he is here in our midst. He is at that table. And he longs for us to receive his gifts of peace and life. May it be so. Alleluia, Christ is risen.